rest of August based on an article that I read that got me thinking. The article's title was "The Essence of Jerkitude." And as I pointed out last week, I didn't know there was such a word. And I had never given a whole lot of thought to who deserves the label of jerk. But the more I read the article, the more I began to see characters in the Bible that fit that description. And that description was this, you'll remember. A jerk is someone who acts like they know it all, and therefore is in a position to make everyone else feel ignorant, and that they need what the know-it-all knows in order to be complete or to be made right. A jerk is someone who jerks other people around based on this posture of a superiority complex that allows that person to look down upon other people and feel justified in doing so. Because of who I am and what I know or what I have or my position, they deserve my judgment. They deserve my condescension. Because of who they are in their position, they deserve my making them feel little, demeaned. Jerk also is someone who takes advantage of other people's weaknesses, kind of zeroes in. And last week we saw how the serpent was sort of the original jerk, stirred up the original sin in humanity by making Adam and Eve feel that existential angst that comes with being a human being, of being creature rather than creator. And the serpent took advantage of that anxiety and tempted the humans into believing that it was all a matter of knowledge, that they could remove their anxiety if they just knew what God knew, if they just ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we humans have been trying ever since to remedy the fact that we are mortals, that we are all going to die, and that in the end we have no control over that reality. This morning I want to look at how two persons fit that description of being jerks. One jerked his brother, and then another got jerked by the same person got jerked by his uncle. Jacob, you know the story of Jacob. Quick Cliff Notes, Reader's Digest version of the story. Twins born. Esau came out first. He was an outdoorsman, ruddy, hairy. The second twin, Jacob, spent his life wanting to be first and did everything he could to take advantage of his brother. And you remember how he did. His brother went out on a hunting trip, came back home famished, was hungry. Jacob took advantage of that hunger, said, "I'll trade you a bowl of the soup I just made for your birthright." And remember, the birthright went to the oldest son. It gave the oldest son the lion's share of the property, 2/3. The rest was divided up among the other male siblings. Jacob wanted that. And Esau, in a weak moment, said, "All right, what good is a birthright if I'm dying of hunger? It's yours." And so Jacob took advantage of his brother's hunger. And then as their father Isaac was near death, Jacob took advantage of Isaac's blindness, because right before the patriarch of the family died, a blessing was given to the next male child who would take that position. And that was to be Esau according to birth order. But Jacob went in, you'll remember, putting the goat hair on his arms so that when Isaac felt him, he would feel like his brother. And in the end, he received the blessing that was to go to his brother. Again, took advantage of another's weakness for his own advantage, manipulating other people, jerking them in such a way as to get what he wanted. Well, we know the story, how Esau came home, asked for Isaac's blessing, and then Isaac and Esau realized they had been jerked by Jacob. And there was only one blessing to go to one son, and it had been given. And Esau now has had all he can take of his brother, and is in anger and rage, is about to go after his brother when their mother, Rebekah, says, "You better get out of here, Jacob. Why don't you go and take refuge with my brother Laban?" And so Jacob goes and finds safety with that part of his extended family. And while he was there, he falls in love with one of Laban's daughters, Rachel, and arranges in that day to earn her hand in marriage. 7 years of work for his uncle would, and you know how the story goes. Laban's oldest daughter, Leah, has not married yet. And so Laban arranges at the wedding ceremony, for Leah to be the one that Jacob marries. And so when Jacob hears, "You may now kiss the bride," he lifts up the veil, and it's not Rachel, whom he thought he had worked 7 years to marry. It is Leah. And this is the part of the story I want us to focus on today. When Jacob discovers that he's been jerked, that he's been tricked, that he's been deceived, Jacob said to Laban, "What have you done to me? Didn't I work for you to have Rachel? Why did you betray me?" And Laban simply says, "Where we live, we don't give the younger woman before the oldest." And so Jacob worked 7 more years in order to marry Rachel. Why did you betray me? At this point in the story, this is before he eventually leaves Laban and his cousins, who also get tired of Jacob's ways. Jacob finally says, "I can't stay here. I'm going to go home. I'm going to face the music with my brother Esau." And you remember that all-night wrestling match with God by the river Jabbok, where his name is changed from Jacob to Israel, one who wrestles with God. Before that wrestling match, it seems like Jacob is incapable of feeling what another feels, what another person feels. It seemed he was incapable of making the connection between the experience of being betrayed by Laban and what he'd been doing to his brother Esau and their father Isaac. That sense of betrayal, of taking advantage, manipulating another person for one's own advantage, what one wanted for one's self. That seems to me to be the sin of the double standard. The double standard being, it's okay for me to do it to you, but it's not okay for you to do it to me. That sense of I can justify my being a jerk to you, but you better not do the same to me. And so today I want to look at how the use of the sin of the double standard undermines our relationships. That sense that I have a right to betray you because of my position and who I am, even if you are the loser. You are made to suffer. I remember, I guess Michael was 9, 10, 11. And I remember the night sitting on his bed after a Little League ball game. He was just sobbing. He says, Daddy, at the beginning of the year, the coach said that every player on the team would play every game. Michael had not played that game. And he said, Daddy, why isn't the coach keeping his word to us? And I wondered the same thing. And I began to watch what was going on. I saw that the head coach's son and the 2 assistant coaches' sons played every game, every inning. And I saw that they would make the same arrows and would strike out just as Michael did. So I was asking the same question Michael was asking. And then at the end of the season, lo and behold, the head coach's son and the 2 assistant coaches' sons, all 3 made the all-star team. A double standard that I'm sure those fathers felt justified in applying on behalf of their sons, but I felt very differently by the way it affected my son. The double standard. I remember riding on an airplane trip once, and this young mother had a young child that was very upset. It was crying. I think it was a boy, little boy, was crying. Now, because my daughter had children about the same age, and she had told me about airplane trips in which you really had to be careful about the air pressure change because in little ones, the eustachian tube isn't large enough to make that equalization of pressure, and so it can really create a lot of ear pain. I kind of thought maybe I had a sense for what was going on with this little one. And the mother, the baby, the young one was distraught. The mother was distraught because the mother was so aware of not only her child's pain, but of the discomfort of the people around. And a few rows back, there was this gentleman who was not gentle, who spent most of the trip loudly so that all of us could hear, criticizing, berating, judging this young mother for her child's cry. How dare she disturb my airplane trip? I suspect if she had been his daughter and that had been his grandson, there had been a different standard used to judge that whole situation. The use of the double standard. Many of us who've lived the last few decades have seen the change in a double standard in terms of professions that have opened up to women. There used to be a double standard, fairly strictly enforced. There were certain professions women couldn't do. Why? Because they were women. That was it. Not because they weren't smart enough or anything else enough. It was just they were women. And that double standard kept the professions sort of locked in and reserved for males, right? I was on a team for a 5-day academy up in Racine, Wisconsin, long, long ago. And a participant in that 5-day academy was a woman who had a ring on her finger that indicated she was in the Baseball Hall of Fame. You know why? Did you see the movie A League of Their Own? In 1943, when all the male baseball players had gone to war, there was actually a women's professional baseball league that played. You remember Tom Hanks and Rosie O'Donnell and Madonna and Jenna Davis in that movie. It portrayed a historical fact. And this woman, at the end of that movie, they actually have a photograph of the actual women who were still living that played in that professional baseball league. And because the double standard had been dropped, at least for a year, women proved that they could play baseball too, kind of like that Little League pitcher on the Philadelphia Little League team proved to the South Nashville baseball team this week that girls can pitch. She pitched a 2-hitter. The Philadelphia team beat the South Nashville team 4-0. And all the ESPN sports announcers were saying, she's not just throwing, she's pitching. 80 miles an hour, a girl. It's hard for a double standard to be upheld and reinforced when empirical experience disputes it, and that's what's happened, hasn't it? To the double standard of whether women can be attorneys or preachers or doctors or surgeons or judges, or we know that double standard was nothing more than prejudice bias on our part, and we were denying ourselves as a people the gifts and the talents and the abilities that God gave women to share with the rest of us, the double standard. I have found that it's really, really hard for double standards to last if you have a wife or you have kids. Because your wife and your kids see right through your illogic, they see right through your hypocrisy, and it seems like God's job description for them is to have them pointed out to you. If you're a man in the congregation, would you raise your hand if that's ever happened to you? I remember when our kids were younger, my grandparents were living with my aunt and uncle in Blanchard, Louisiana, and during the summer when we would take our trip to the coast, we would swing through Louisiana and stop off and visit them. I think maybe we had just bought my daughter a used Honda Accord, which had a straight shift, which she almost wrecked because she had never driven a straight shift before. But apparently, Uncle Bill heard that Julie had a Honda Accord, and he went on his soapbox about Japanese products. He would never own a Japanese car. He would never buy a Japanese product of any sort. At which time my son went over to his TV set, looked closely, and said, "Where is the Sheba maid?" Double standard. In our heads, there is a standard that we want to apply to everyone else but ourselves. I think Jesus pretty much summarized it when he said, "Do unto others as you want them to do to you." Apply the same standard to others that you want applied to you. Judge not, lest you be yourself judged by the same judgment you're judging others. Or how does it go? What's good for the goose is good for the gander, Or don't be a jerk. I'm saying that to me first. All sermons are preached to the preacher first. Don't be a jerk. Jesus didn't say that. I said that. I think it's close to what Jesus meant when he said, treat others the way you want to be treated.